Thank you very much. And let me welcome all of you, add my voice to welcome all of you to the Tana Forum, which continues to be the foremost think tank on peace and security in Africa, with our symbol, the baobab. The baobab tree is considered in Africa the tree of wisdom, and it's normally found in the center of our villages and communities, and that is where the elders of our communities sit to think about the progress and welfare of those communities. And so let me warmly welcome you to Bahirda and add my words to our host, the President of the region. Her Excellency, Madam President Sally Work-Zewde, President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Her Excellency Dr. Banda, former President of Malawi, Her Excellency Catherine Samba-Panza, former President of the Central African Republic, my comrade and friend, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, former President of South Africa, His Excellency Mohamed Guled, Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, who just gave us a very thought-provoking talk, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, who's just left, AU Chairperson, Honorable General Eli Tumwini, Minister for Security of Uganda, His Excellency Dr. Richard Sezibara, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Rwanda, His Excellency Dr. Gedu Andagachu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, His Excellency Ambassador Mekonnen, President of the Amhara region, Ambassador Chegui, who has always been generous to us and being a permanent fixture at these fora. His Excellency Mohamed Saleh, Head of MINUSMA, Ms. Bintu Keita, Assistant Secretary General for Africa at the United Nations, and His Excellency Molefi, Minister of Presidential Affairs of Botswana, and indeed all distinguished guests who have come here. Let me just quickly take the opportunity as Chair of TANA to thank our partners and our funders, without whom this forum would be impossible. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Ethiopian government for the support they continue to give to TANA as the host of this forum. I'd like to thank our partner, the AU Commission. Unfortunately, the President has just left. I had the opportunity to say thank you personally anyway, but all of you who hear it can tell him again that I publicly acknowledge the support of the AU Commission. We want to thank the Sheraton Addis and the Blue Nile Resort Hotel, who are our hosts, giving us the beautiful hospitality that we're enjoying. And there are many governments I must thank. The government of Germany have been very generous to the Tana Forum, the government of Switzerland, the government of Australia, the government of Austria, the government of Belgium, the government of Canada, the government of Norway, the government of New Zealand, the Amhara region, the President has just gotten up, the government of Denmark, the U.S. Institute for Peace, our private sector partners, including the Brenhurst Foundation, the Dangote Group, the EASE Consulting, and Ernst & Young. These are all companies and governments that have been very generous to TANA. My job is not a very difficult one, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm supposed to present the key highlights of the state of peace and security in Africa. It's published for the previous year, so this is Peace and Security in Africa in 2018, but of course it's published in 2019. I'm sure all of you have seen the electronic copies of this report and probably would have read it. I'll just touch on the key highlights because of constraints of time so that we can move on to other things. The tendency in past reports has been to focus on casualties and effects and impacts of armed groups, mostly in respect of conflicts. But in the 2018 report, you see a more wider focus on other issues of peace and security that have to do more with adverse effects of climate change, for example, and then also the outbreak of communicable diseases and public health issues. As you know, currently ongoing, there's still a battle with Ebola in the DRC, and it is our hope that it will be contained. You remember a few years ago, West Africa was hit by Ebola, and it took quite a lot of effort from the whole international community to be able to overcome it. In the year 2018, we saw positive developments on the continent in respect of peace and security. And these include, as has been mentioned already by Her Excellency the President, the existing rapprochement that has been established between Ethiopia and Eritrea. The whole of Africa is standing in solidarity with the two countries to be able to resolve the age-old Cold War that has existed between the two. And it's our belief that this rapprochement will bring a new wave of change in the whole of the Horn of Africa. And we believe establishing peace in the Horn of Africa will lead to tremendous human progress and development. This is coming at a time when Ethiopia itself is undertaking deep political and democratic reforms, and all of us stand in solidarity with this country. In the course of the year, 27 African countries, according to the report, held elections and saw successful transfers of power. It shows that democracy is becoming entrenched on the African continent. There was the expansion of space for civil society engagement, and so more civil society groups sprang up and participated in respect of pushing for issues of good governance. There was also increased participation of young people in politics and governance. In many countries, we saw young people standing for elective office and winning, entering parliament or local councils and other places. This is a significant development, and we wish that this will be encouraged so that more the youth participate actively in the way their countries are governed. Significant steps were taken towards trade and free movement of people. And so, as you are aware, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was signed. And it is hoped that in July this year, the implementation of this agreement would start. There's a lot of hope that this will lead to increased trade between African countries and lead to a win-win situation where countries would benefit from the comparative advantages that they have. Ladies and gentlemen, various conflicts at the war level continued at the same intensity, but some progress was made on others. South Sudan is an example. We are all holding bated breath, hoping that the peace, the ceasefire that has been in effect will continue and that it will lead to lasting peace within South Sudan. Of course, Somalia, we'll hear a lot more about Somalia, and we also take note of other issues taking place in the Horn of Africa that are captured in the report as civil unrest. 2018 saw a lot of civil unrest in many countries, and the report actually says that no African country was spared some form of unrest. But of course, the degree of violence or rioting that characterized these unrest differed from country to country. In some countries, it was more violent, and coercive forces of the state, the military and the police, had to be brought out to quell these riots and civil unrest, sometimes leading to casualties. And so that's something we need to note. The triggers behind these unrest that we're seeing in several countries include mainly bread and butter issues. As a result of world events, as a result of inflation and several other effects within various countries, costs of food and basic services are going up, and the people take to the streets to protest the high cost of living, and sometimes these turn violent. The gender dimension in respect of peace and security was noted, and it was noted again very sadly that women continue to bear the brunt of insecurity on the African continent. They are victims of rape, kidnapping, and death. And the areas around Lake Chad Basin area were mentioned, and also in Central African Republic, where some militia fighters attacked, kidnapped, and mass-raped women. These are noted in the report. It also notes the abduction of another 110 girls in Nigeria. Our information is that after negotiations with the insurgent groups, many of these girls were returned, but we know that of the original Chibok girls, many of them still remain missing, and it's a very unpleasant environment for young girls who just want to go to school and get an education in that part of Nigeria. The report covering 2018 had 6 broad cross-cutting themes, and I'll just go quickly through them. One was on corruption, social policy, and protest, which I just talked about. The other was on political liberalization and election hotspots. The third was on adverse climate change, conflict, and forced migration. And the fourth was on managing resource wars amongst farmers and pastoralists. This is becoming an increasing problem. As population grows in Africa, you have pastoralists and you have agriculturists. And while the pastoralists are looking for increased space to graze their cattle, they come into conflict with farmers whose crops are destroyed. This is becoming manifest, especially in some parts of middle and northern Nigeria, where constant clashes between these two groups continue to happen. We also have violent extremism and terrorism, which is becoming an increasing threat in the Sahel region and spreading into some of the savanna regions of Africa. And also how the cyberspace is becoming the new epicenter of warfare. So these are all issues noted in the report. Different solutions and different efforts have been undertaken to try and contain these challenges of peace and security, and these have yielded different outcomes. The report finally deals with issues of how major events that occur in other parts of the world are continuing to have far-reaching implications for peace and security in Africa. And this year, the report drew attention to 6 of such global developments. And you may be welcome to add your own. These developments are not exhaustive. And Africa is a part of this world, and so it will continue to be impacted by what happens outside the continent. And I'll just rush quickly through the 6. One is the rise of far-right political parties and pro-nationalist movements in Europe. We need to take note of. 2 is the, I don't know how to describe it, the messy divorce currently taking place between Britain and the European Union. I don't know when that divorce will be consummated. Then 3 is the America First posture of administrations like the Trump administration in the United States. That is linked with the rise of populist, pro-nationalist parties in Europe. The 4th is the paradoxes of multilateralism. The 5th is the implication of unilateral multilateralism, showcased by how established and new major powers are creating individual platforms to engage with African countries. And finally, 6, the consolidation of global franchises in disorder and chaos with the proliferation of armed insurgency and terrorist groups. With this we will be talking about franchises like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, with the dislocation of the caliphate in the Middle East. Many of the former fighters have drifted across into other parts of the world. We've seen what happened in Sri Lanka recently. A formerly dormant, benign Islamic group suddenly was able to wreak that kind of violence under the franchise of ISIS. In the savannah and the Sahel, we know that many of such people have infiltrated and are active in many of the Islamist groups there. And so there's a summary that I could prepare and give to you. And I'm sure that you would enjoy reading the main report. It contains much more, it's much broader than I have tried to do, but I hope that I have done my best. Thank you very much.